Imagine saving up for luxury, only to be told you don't belong. That's exactly what happened to Darius Montgomery, a black CEO flying from JFK to Los Angeles, and what he did next shocked everyone on that plane. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you believe dignity should never be denied. Comment below, what would you do if this happened to you? And make sure you subscribe, because this story is about to take a turn you won't believe. Darius Montgomery was not just any passenger. At 42, he had built a tech empire from scratch. Born and raised in Atlanta, he knew the sting of systemic racism firsthand. He had fought his way through scholarships, internships, and corporate hurdles to earn a Harvard MBA, and now he ran a company that was revolutionizing AI technology. Success had come at a cost, but Darius knew the value of recognition. Today, that recognition was supposed to come in the form of a first-class seat. He had booked it weeks in advance, paid in full, and expected nothing more than the comfort and dignity his achievement warranted. As he wheeled his suitcase through the bustling JFK terminal, the air was thick with the usual chaos: families chasing gates, passengers fumbling with boarding passes, flight announcements echoing across the concourse. Yet, Darius felt a strange tension. Something about the way some of the staff looked at him as he approached the gate made his stomach tighten. He brushed it off. After all, he had been here many times before. He was used to people's assumptions, but nothing could prepare him for what would happen next. Boarding began, and Darius moved with quiet confidence toward the first-class cabin. He handed the attendant his boarding pass, ready to settle into his seat by the window. And then came the words that would ignite the chain of events to follow. "Sir, are you sure this is your seat?" Darius blinked. He looked down at the boarding pass, then back at the attendant. "Yes, it's seat 3A," he said calmly, handing over the ticket. The attendant leaned in slightly, her tone patronizing. "We just want to make sure you're in the right place, sir. First class is reserved for certain passengers." A hush fell over the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, others glanced away, pretending not to notice. But a few whispered under their breath, and the tension began to grow. Darius felt a familiar sting. He had faced microaggressions like this before, in boardrooms, restaurants, and airports. But something in his gut told him that this time, things would be different. He wasn't just going to argue. He had a plan, one that would ensure respect and accountability. "Sir, I think you should move," the attendant insisted, her voice firm now. "You're in the wrong section." Darius held his ground. "I am in the correct section. I paid for this seat, and I expect to be treated accordingly." The murmurs grew louder. A few passengers began pulling out their phones, recording the interaction. Darius noticed the camera lenses turning toward him. For a moment, he felt the weight of the situation, the isolation, the scrutiny, the injustice, but he didn't flinch. He remembered the countless times he had been underestimated because of the color of his skin. He remembered being told he didn't belong in certain schools, offices, or rooms. Today, he would not let history repeat itself. The attendant stepped back, glancing toward the gate agent. Darius could see the shift in her demeanor, a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. The gate agent approached, reviewing his boarding pass. "Sir, we just need to verify." Darius held his gaze steady. "I understand verification, but I am in the correct seat. I have my boarding pass, and I have every right to occupy this space." A few passengers whispered among themselves. "Did you see that?" one murmured. "He's not backing down." Another shook their head. "This is going to be interesting." Darius stayed calm, exuding a quiet authority that seemed to draw the eyes of everyone on board. But internally, he knew the next few minutes would determine whether this flight would simply be another uncomfortable encounter or something far more consequential. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, discreetly opening the airline's executive contact app, a tool reserved for high-value passengers like himself. In moments, he would be escalating the situation beyond the cabin crew. And in doing so, he would ensure that no one could undermine his dignity without consequences. Within 12 minutes, he thought, this plane is going to experience something it will never forget. As the boarding continued, Darius looked around at the first-class passengers. Some avoided eye contact, others studied him with curiosity. He didn't need validation from them. His authority, his dignity, and his rights were non-negotiable. The attendant, sensing the escalating tension, gave him one last warning. "Sir, you need to move." Darius took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'm going to stay right here," he said firmly, his voice calm but unwavering. "And I suggest we resolve this professionally." The murmurs turned into whispers, whispers into focused stares. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. And in that moment, every passenger in the cabin realized that this was no ordinary confrontation. Darius Montgomery was about to turn an act of racism into a lesson in accountability. And as the seconds ticked by, the entire plane would soon understand that disrespect has consequences, even at 30,000 feet. But what happened next, no one on this plane saw coming. Darius Montgomery wasn't just a CEO by title. He was a man who had fought his way into rooms where he was often the only black face. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, he grew up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce but dreams were abundant. His parents had always stressed the importance of education, resilience, and dignity, teaching him that success was never a handout, it was earned. By the age of 18, Darius had secured a full scholarship to a top-tier university. There he thrived academically but often faced the subtle, and sometimes overt, racism of peers who underestimated him. Professors would occasionally dismiss his insights, classmates would question his credentials, and yet he pressed on. Every slight became motivation, every barrier became a stepping stone. After completing his undergraduate degree in computer science, Darius went on to earn his MBA from Harvard, graduating with honors. While many saw only his accolades, few understood the battles he fought behind the scenes. Corporate America was unforgiving, and for a young black man trying to navigate venture capital and boardrooms, every meeting was a proving ground. By the time he turned 42, Darius had founded Montgomery Technologies, a startup that specialized in AI-driven solutions for Fortune 500 companies. His company was booming, with high-profile clients and investors who believed in his vision. Yet, despite his success, he knew that recognition in the corporate world did not shield him from prejudice in everyday life, especially in places like airports, restaurants, or even airlines. Today's flight from New York to Los Angeles was crucial. He had an all-important investor meeting in Los Angeles that could secure his company's next round of funding, millions of dollars that could scale his business to new heights. That's why he had booked first class. It wasn't just about comfort. As he approached the boarding gate, Darius reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Each milestone had been hard-won: late nights coding in a cramped apartment, pitching investors who often ignored him, and proving to an industry steeped in old biases that his ideas were worth listening to. Yet, despite all of this, Darius knew the world could still attempt to undermine him. He had learned to read subtle cues, the sideways glances, the hesitant tone, the lingering questions about his credentials. And as he looked toward the first-class cabin, he felt that familiar, unsettling tension. Something in the way the staff was preparing the cabin told him that today would be different. He recalled a trip 2 years ago, when a similar situation had occurred. A flight attendant had questioned his seat, citing some vague policy. Darius had complied then, suppressing his frustration to avoid a scene. But that experience had stayed with him. He knew that silence often allowed injustice to persist, and he was no longer willing to let that happen. As the boarding process began, he moved forward with quiet authority, suitcase rolling behind him. He scanned the rows, identifying his seat, 3, first class. Paid in full. Legitimate. Every fiber of his being demanded that this truth be respected. He noticed other passengers taking their seats around him, many oblivious to the tension building in the cabin. A few, however, were watching him curiously, sensing the subtle power struggle about to unfold. Darius didn't need their approval, he needed fairness. Then, the moment of confrontation arrived. The flight attendant approached, her steps measured but firm. She glanced at him and asked the words he had long anticipated. "Sir, are you sure this is your seat?" Darius handed over his boarding pass, maintaining eye contact. "Yes, seat 3, he replied evenly. Her brow furrowed. "We just want to make sure, sir. First class is for specific passengers." Darius felt the familiar sting of a lifetime of underestimation. But instead of reacting with anger, he drew on the patience and strategy that had carried him through every boardroom battle, every investor pitch, every microaggression he had endured. He held his ground, speaking with calm authority. I am in the correct seat. I paid for it, and I expect to be treated accordingly. The attendant stepped back slightly, signaling for another crew member, the gate agent, to approach. Darius's heart rate quickened just slightly, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was about to unfold. The murmurs among passengers grew louder. A few phones discreetly came out, capturing the tension for posterity. Whispers filled the cabin. Look at him, he's not backing down, someone said. The gate agent approached, a clipboard in hand, scanning Darius's boarding pass. Sir, we just need to verify. Darius interrupted, calm but firm. Verification is fine. But I am in the correct seat. I have my boarding pass, and I have every right to occupy this space. The agent hesitated, realizing that this was no ordinary passenger. Darius's composure, his firm voice, and his quiet confidence left no room for dismissal. Passengers sensed it too, something significant was happening. Then, just as Darius anticipated, the attendant gave a subtle signal to another crew member, perhaps seeking backup. The tension escalated. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and the murmurs turned into focused attention. The first-class cabin was charged with a mixture of curiosity, unease, and quiet anticipation. Darius took a slow, steadying breath. He knew the next step would determine the outcome. This was not about confrontation, it was about asserting his dignity and ensuring accountability. He reached into his pocket, discreetly opening the airline's executive contact app, a tool reserved for high-value passengers. In just moments, he could escalate this beyond the cabin crew. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. Every passenger felt it, the weight of the moment, the significance of standing firm against discrimination. And then, with a calm, unwavering voice, Darius spoke directly to the attendant. I'm going to stay right here. Let's resolve this professionally. A hush fell. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged glances, sensing that this confrontation was about to escalate in a way none of them had anticipated. And in that moment, Darius thought, the entire plane was about to experience something it would never forget. The gate agent stepped closer, clipboard in hand, tension radiating from every movement. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. The murmurs grew louder. Would they finally acknowledge his seat, or would this small cabin become a battleground for dignity? The cabin air felt heavier than usual, thick with anticipation. Passengers whispered nervously, some pretending not to watch, others filming discreetly on their phones. Darius Montgomery remained calm, his posture composed, yet internally he was ready for what was coming. He knew that standing firm was not just about him, it was about asserting the dignity every person deserved. The flight attendant folded her arms and leaned slightly toward him. Sir, we really need you to move. First class is only for premium passengers. Darius handed her his boarding pass again, letting the laminated card speak for itself. I am a premium passenger. I have paid for this seat, and I expect it to be respected. Her frown deepened. There was a brief pause as she glanced toward the other attendants, clearly seeking support. Passengers were now fully aware of the escalating tension. A couple of older travelers muttered under their breath, I've never seen anything like this on a flight before. Darius took a slow breath, steadying his voice. I am not arguing. I am simply asserting my rights under airline policy and federal regulations. I would appreciate if we could resolve this without further conflict. The attendant hesitated, clearly frustrated, and gestured toward the gate agent who had followed them into the cabin. We need your confirmation here, she said sharply, glancing at Darius. The gate agent, clipboard in hand, approached cautiously. He scanned the boarding pass and muttered under his breath. Everything appears correct, but there's been a complaint. Darius leaned slightly forward. I understand the complaint, but my seat is valid. According to the Airline Passenger Bill of Rights and DOT anti-discrimination regulations, I am entitled to occupy the seat I purchased. Delaying or removing me without cause could be considered a violation of these policies. The cabin went silent. Several passengers exchanged looks of astonishment. Few had ever heard the combination of calm authority and legal knowledge wielded in a first-class cabin. One young woman, seated near the window, whispered to her companion, "He's not just standing up for himself, he knows his rights." The attendant's composure wavered, her lips pressed tightly together. She glanced at the gate agent again. He opened a small tablet and began typing furiously, presumably contacting airline headquarters. Darius noticed, but he did not flinch. He had expected this escalation. Darius took the moment to address the entire row, speaking just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I am not trying to create conflict. I am asking for what is rightfully mine. Every passenger deserves fair treatment. If this situation escalates, I will be forced to contact airline management directly and involve the FAA or DOT if necessary." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Phones clicked. One man whispered, "Wow, he's about to take this higher." Darius could see the attendant struggling to maintain authority. This was a critical moment. If she persisted in denying his seat, the airline would be held accountable, and the incident could escalate publicly in minutes. He knew the procedures well. Under DOT guidelines, a passenger alleging discrimination has the right to a formal complaint and an immediate response. Airlines cannot remove a passenger from a valid seat without proper cause, especially if the seat was purchased. The attendant finally straightened her posture and said, "Sir, we just need you to wait while we verify your status." Darius shook his head gently. "Waiting is fine, but I am staying in my seat. You may verify, but I will not vacate a seat that I legally purchased." By now, the cabin was buzzing. Some passengers whispered quietly to each other, while others stared openly, cameras raised. A young father murmured to his son, "Look, he's showing them that you stand up for yourself, no matter who challenges you." The gate agent's tablet pinged with a message from headquarters. He glanced at it nervously, then turned to Darius. "Sir, airline management wants to speak with you directly. They are reviewing the boarding records and your account." Darius nodded slowly, maintaining composure. "I am available. I suggest we resolve this efficiently. I will cooperate fully, but I will not accept discrimination." The attendant glanced around the cabin, now fully aware that she was on display. Every passenger could see the unfolding story, and some were whispering their support. The tension in the air was palpable. This was no longer a personal disagreement. It was a moment of accountability. Darius opened his phone discreetly and typed a brief email to the airline's executive relations team, summarizing the situation. Seat 3A, boarding verified, crew denying seat without justification, possible discrimination complaint. Within moments, the response pinged. "We are reviewing. Stand by for instructions. Do not escalate further unless necessary." He placed his phone down calmly, letting the presence of authority, both legal and executive, speak for itself. The attendant now faced the stark reality. This was no longer a simple cabin dispute. The cabin was silent, passengers fully aware that something significant was about to happen. Darius's calm, assertive demeanor had shifted the dynamic entirely. The gate agent hovered nervously, unsure of the next move, while the attendant hesitated, her initial confidence waning. Then, as if the tension had been compressed into a single heartbeat, the cabin door to the cockpit opened briefly. The captain appeared, eyes alert, clearly informed of a developing situation. Passengers felt the weight of authority fill the cabin. Darius Montgomery, seated firmly in his rightful first-class spot, had changed the course of what could have been a routine flight. The attendant stepped back, biting her lip, while the gate agent whispered urgently into his headset. The murmurs among passengers grew louder. Phones were recording, eyes were watching, and the atmosphere was electric with suspense. Darius knew the moment had come to escalate further if necessary, using real-world protocols to ensure justice was served. He leaned back slightly, exuding calm authority, ready for the next phase. And in that instant, Darius thought, the entire plane was poised on the edge of confrontation. What happened next would determine who was in control and who would be held accountable. The captain returned to the cockpit, leaving the cabin in tense anticipation. The attendant looked at Darius, then at the gate agent, and finally muttered, "We can't just let this slide." Would they admit fault, or would this confrontation spiral further? The next few minutes would decide everything. The cabin was silent, yet charged with anticipation. Phones were raised, whispers spreading like wildfire, and eyes were locked on Darius Montgomery. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing tension around him. The attendant's earlier confidence was visibly cracking, and even the gate agent now seemed uneasy, their fingers hovering over a headset, unsure of what to do next. Darius knew it was time to escalate. He reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved his phone, opening the airline's executive contact app. This was not a tool for the average passenger. It was reserved for high-value customers, frequent flyers, and CEOs like him who carried corporate influence. Yet he had used it sparingly, always hoping he wouldn't need to rely on it. Today, the situation warranted action. He began typing a concise, professional message: Seat 3A, boarding verified, crew denying valid first-class access, possible discrimination, immediate intervention requested. Within moments, the response pinged back: "We are reviewing your case. Please stand by. Do not escalate further unless necessary." Darius placed the phone down calmly, letting its mere presence speak volumes. The crew noticed. The flight attendant's lips pressed tightly together. She shifted from foot to foot, uncertainty radiating from her posture. The gate agent's hand trembled slightly as he whispered into his headset, relaying updates to airline management. A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin. Passengers now realized this was no ordinary boarding dispute. Darius's quiet, measured authority combined with executive-level leverage had transformed the situation into something far bigger. Some passengers whispered among themselves, admiration and disbelief mixed in their tones. Others leaned closer to catch every word, sensing history in the making. The attendant tried to regain control. "Sir, please wait while we resolve this internally." Her voice, once firm and commanding, now carried a slight tremor. Darius kept his gaze steady. "I am waiting. I expect this resolution to be immediate. My rights under the Airline Passenger Bill of Rights and DOT anti-discrimination policies are clear. I have a purchased seat, and denying me access constitutes a formal complaint under federal regulations." At that moment, the gate agent glanced nervously toward the cockpit. The captain, already briefed about the situation, was monitoring the development. Darius noticed the subtle shift. The crew had realized the gravity of the scenario, and management intervention was imminent. Panic began to seep through their composed facades. A young couple near the window whispered, clearly impressed. "He's not just standing up, he's using their own rules against them," the man said. His wife nodded, eyes wide. "I've never seen anyone do that before. This is powerful." Darius allowed the cabin to absorb the moment, letting his presence assert authority. Then, he picked up his phone again, dialing the executive hotline directly. Within seconds, he was connected to a senior airline manager. Calmly, he explained the situation, emphasizing the denial of his valid first-class seat, the discriminatory undertone of the interaction, and the immediate need for action. From the other end of the line, a voice replied, "Sir, we understand. Please remain in your seat while we review. We are escalating to headquarters." Darius leaned back slightly, composed, but internally he was preparing for the next escalation. He knew that management alone might not resolve the crew's resistance quickly enough. The cabin was already electric, with whispers and recordings increasing by the second. The attendant's hands trembled as she whispered to the gate agent. "What do we do? He's not moving." The gate agent's voice was low, urgent. "We're waiting for instructions, but the higher-ups are asking if we should delay the flight." A few passengers glanced around nervously. "Delay the flight?" one asked. "Is that even legal?" Darius smiled slightly, knowing full well that the airline had no choice. According to FAA regulations, if a passenger alleges discrimination, the crew cannot proceed with departure until the matter is addressed. Ignoring it could result in federal scrutiny, fines, and public backlash. He had carefully studied these rules, and now they worked in his favor. The cabin became increasingly tense as the attendant and gate agent realized that Darius's persistence, combined with executive escalation and federal regulations, had put them in a corner. Every move they made was being scrutinized by passengers and recorded for posterity. The once confident attendant now spoke in hesitant tones. "We may need to delay the flight," she stammered under her breath. At that precise moment, the captain appeared at the front of the cabin. His presence brought immediate attention. Calm but authoritative, he addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a verification issue with a first-class seat, we will temporarily remain on the ground while the matter is resolved." A collective gasp ran through the cabin. Phones clicked, whispers surged, and even the skeptical passengers realized the gravity of the situation. Darius's calculated actions had brought the entire plane to a standstill, not through anger, but through knowledge, strategy, and dignity. The flight attendant's posture slumped. The gate agent's fingers hovered over his headset, waiting for instructions from headquarters. Panic now dominated the crew's demeanor. They understood that they were under scrutiny not just from Darius, but from the airline's top executives and, potentially, the federal authorities. Darius took a slow breath. The plane was grounded, the crew panicking, passengers attentive, and he remained calm. He knew the next few minutes would determine how quickly justice was served and whether the airline would publicly acknowledge the error. He glanced around the cabin, noting the silent support of many passengers. Some were nodding subtly, others whispered quietly to neighbors about the unfolding confrontation. Everyone felt the tension, everyone felt the stakes. And then, just as Darius prepared for the next step, the gate agent whispered urgently into the attendant's earpiece, glancing nervously at him. The words carried like an electric shock through the cabin. "They're instructing us to hold the plane. Headquarters is reviewing for potential federal involvement." At that moment, Darius Montgomery knew the confrontation had reached its tipping point. Every eye in the cabin was on him. The crew, trapped by procedure and law, could no longer deny the truth. The stage was set for a historic moment of accountability. The captain's voice cut through the tense cabin once more. "We are temporarily grounded pending resolution. Please remain seated. This is a serious matter, and your cooperation is appreciated." Passengers leaned forward, phones ready. The attendant glanced at Darius, fear and uncertainty flashing in her eyes. Would they finally concede, or would this confrontation escalate further? What happened next would decide who truly held control of the plane. The plane had fallen into an eerie silence, passengers frozen in a mixture of anticipation and disbelief. Darius Montgomery sat firmly in seat 3A, his posture calm, yet radiating quiet authority. Every eye in first class, and increasingly in the cabin behind him, was fixed on him. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, whispers traveled like wildfire. The entire atmosphere felt electric, as if time had slowed. Darius's phone buzzed gently. It was a message from the airline's executive relations team. "We have escalated to headquarters. Hold your position. Do not vacate your seat. We are reviewing the situation under DOT and FAA regulations." He smiled slightly, a small but deliberate gesture. This was the turning point he had prepared for. Every microaggression, every subtle prejudice he had endured in airports, offices, and boardrooms had led to this moment. This wasn't about first class, it was about accountability. The flight attendant's hands trembled as she whispered to the gate agent. "Sir, should we ask him to leave the seat?" The gate agent's voice was low, filled with tension. "Headquarters says hold the plane. They're reviewing federal regulations. FAA could get involved." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some passengers whispered encouragement, "Good for him." Others leaned toward neighbors, phones recording the moment. Darius could feel their support, but he remained focused, knowing the real challenge was still ahead. The captain appeared at the front of the cabin once more, voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a verified complaint regarding a first-class seat, we will be temporarily grounded until the matter is fully resolved. The airline is reviewing the situation in accordance with DOT and FAA protocols. We appreciate your patience." The words were like a hammer striking the room. Grounded. Official. The plane could not take off, the crew could not proceed, and the rules were now firmly on Darius's side. The flight attendant's shoulders slumped. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She had assumed authority when the situation began, but Darius's knowledge, composure, and executive-level leverage had turned the tide. She whispered to the gate agent again, clearly panicked. We need instructions. He's not moving. The gate agent nodded toward the cabin phones. Headquarters is watching. FAA regulations are in play. Any further action without authorization could be legally problematic. Darius leaned back slightly, maintaining composure. He knew that escalating further without a fight was now unnecessary. The plane was grounded, the crew was constrained by procedure, and the passengers were witnesses. Yet he remained prepared. He had anticipated resistance. He had anticipated stalling. And he had anticipated fear. He addressed the cabin softly but firmly, ensuring his words were heard. This is not about conflict. It is about fairness and accountability. Every passenger deserves dignity. When rules are ignored or applied selectively, the system fails. That is why I have escalated this situation to the highest levels. Several passengers nodded subtly, murmuring agreement. One elderly man whispered to his wife, "He's right. This is how you stand up for yourself without losing control." The flight attendant now looked visibly shaken. Her attempts to regain authority had failed. She shifted nervously, glancing at the gate agent, then toward the cockpit. Darius's presence, his calm voice, and the authority of airline management combined to render her powerless. Darius reached for his phone again, opening the FAA and DOT guidelines he had carefully studied. He let the pages show on his screen subtly, ensuring anyone watching could see the documented rights of passengers. Denying a passenger their valid seat, especially under circumstances suggestive of discrimination, could result in federal scrutiny, fines, and public accountability for the airline. The gate agent, now fully aware of the severity, whispered urgently to the attendant, "We can't move him. Headquarters confirms FAA oversight. If we force him to leave, it could escalate into a legal violation." The tension in the cabin thickened. Passengers shifted, some whispering updates to friends, others recording every move. A young woman leaned toward her neighbor, "This is insane. He's actually stopping the plane." Darius, feeling the moment, remained composed. He knew the next few minutes would define how this confrontation would be remembered. The plane, held hostage by procedure and law, could not take off, and the crew's panic was now palpable. The captain's voice cut through again, "We are officially grounded. Any attempt to move the passenger from seat 3A without proper authorization could result in DOT investigation and FAA penalties. Please remain seated and calm." A collective gasp echoed through the cabin. Phones clicked, passengers whispered, and the attendant's face paled. The gate agent was frozen, headset still in hand, waiting for the next instruction from headquarters. Darius allowed himself a slight nod. His influence had fully asserted itself. The rules were now his ally. Every step of the escalation, from executive contacts to knowledge of FAA protocols, had brought the plane to a standstill, ensuring that justice, not prejudice, dictated the next moves. And yet, even in this moment of triumph, the tension did not subside. Every passenger sensed that the confrontation was far from over. The crew knew that failure to acknowledge wrongdoing could have serious consequences, and Darius knew that a final resolution was within reach, but it required one last push. He looked around the cabin. Phones were recording, eyes were locked on him, and the whispers of support were growing louder. He adjusted his suit jacket, a calm but deliberate gesture of authority. Then, a voice from the back of the cabin broke through the tense hum. The gate agent whispered urgently into the attendant's earpiece. "Headquarters is instructing us. The passenger is not to be moved. Prepare for FAA intervention if necessary." The attendant froze. Her shoulders slumped, her face pale. She realized fully that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The plane is grounded, Darius thought. The rules are on my side, and the crew has no choice but to comply. But the real test, the confrontation that will decide accountability, is about to begin. The attendant turned to Darius, her voice barely audible. Sir, if you continue like this, we don't know what headquarters will do. Darius met her gaze calmly, unwavering. Would they finally accept responsibility, or would this escalate to a public showdown with FAA and DOT oversight? The next moments would decide everything. The cabin had transformed from a routine flight environment into a stage of tense anticipation. Every passenger was silent, phones raised discreetly, recording the extraordinary unfolding scene. Darius Montgomery remained in seat 3A, calm, composed, exuding an authority that was palpable even to those who had initially doubted him. The flight attendant, once confident in her ability to assert control, now shifted nervously, eyes darting between Darius, the gate agent, and the cockpit. The subtle quivers in her posture betrayed her growing realization. The rules were no longer in her favor. The airline's executive team and federal regulations were aligned against any further attempts to deny Darius his rightful seat. Darius, sensing the shift, allowed a small pause, letting the magnitude of the moment settle in. Then he spoke softly but clearly, projecting authority without aggression. This is not about defiance. It is about fairness, dignity, and accountability. Every action has consequences, and ignoring rights, especially when bias is involved, has ramifications that go far beyond a single cabin. The gate agent swallowed nervously, realizing the truth of his words. He whispered into his headset, glancing at the flight attendant. Sir, management is saying any action against him now could trigger DOT and FAA involvement. We need to comply. The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. Her initial bravado had completely eroded. For the first time, she realized that this confrontation was not about asserting authority, it was about acknowledging the consequences of misjudgment and bias. Passengers leaned forward, whispering to neighbors, some nodding in subtle approval. A young woman whispered, "He's teaching them a lesson in accountability," without raising his voice. A businessman muttered to his colleague, "That's incredible, he's got the law and airline executives behind him." Darius allowed the moment to sink in. He had prepared meticulously, but the outcome depended on more than just procedure. It depended on the realization of those responsible for the discrimination. And now, he could see the subtle cracks forming in their composure. He reached into his jacket and opened his phone again, this time preparing a brief message summarizing the escalation for DOT review. His actions were precise, calculated, and entirely within his rights. Seat verified, crew denying valid access, grounded plane, potential discrimination complaint. Within minutes, the message pinged back with acknowledgement, "Your report is under review. FAA oversight confirmed if necessary. No further escalation from your side required unless prompted." Darius leaned back, maintaining calm authority. The crew's panic had reached its peak, their recognition of potential consequences undeniable. The flight attendant finally spoke, her voice wavering. "I see now. We were wrong to question your seat." Darius nodded slightly, acknowledging the admission without anger. His objective had never been humiliation. It was recognition, accountability, and resolution. The gate agent, still whispering into the headset, glanced at Darius and murmured, "Management is instructing us to apologize formally, to document the incident fully, and to ensure the flight can continue without further issues." Passengers watched, fascinated. The balance of authority had shifted completely. Darius, seated calmly, had turned what could have been a simple confrontation into a moment of undeniable accountability. The crew had no choice but to comply, knowing that any misstep could result in formal reprimands, federal investigation, and widespread public scrutiny. Darius addressed the cabin again, his tone measured and deliberate. "The purpose here is not punishment. It is clarity. Every action has consequences, and accountability ensures that dignity is preserved for everyone. This is a moment that can teach more than anger ever could." Some passengers nodded, others whispered quietly, but all were engaged. Phones were recording, the energy in the cabin palpable. Even skeptical passengers realized that the confrontation was now over. Darius's authority was absolute. The attendant, finally regaining composure, approached Darius. She spoke quietly, but her words carried a weight of acknowledgement. "Sir, on behalf of the airline, we apologize for questioning your seat. It was inappropriate, and we recognize your rights and position. We will ensure headquarters documents this fully and addresses the oversight." Darius allowed himself a slight smile, recognizing that the resolution had begun. He had achieved his objective without aggression, without raising his voice, and without compromising his composure. The crew, once confident and dismissive, was now fully aware of the consequences of misjudgment and bias. Passengers reacted quietly but noticeably, subtle nods, murmurs of approval, and the quiet tapping of phone screens recording every moment. The tension that had filled the cabin began to shift toward a sense of closure, but the story was not entirely finished. Darius knew the final step would cement accountability. He would ensure that the incident was properly documented with headquarters, that FAA and DOT protocols were followed, and that the crew's acknowledgement was formalized. This was not vindictiveness, it was responsibility. He glanced around the cabin, sensing the anticipation. Passengers could feel that this confrontation had moved beyond a personal dispute into a moment of formal resolution. The crew had begun to internalize the lesson: mistakes fueled by bias carry consequences, and authority grounded in knowledge and procedure is unassailable. And yet, even as apologies were extended, the cabin remained tense. The Real resolution required formal documentation, acknowledgement from management, and assurance that discrimination would not be tolerated. Darius understood that without these final steps, the confrontation would be incomplete. The flight attendant and gate agent exchanged a glance, now fully aware of the stakes. Their earlier dismissiveness had vanished, replaced by recognition and nervous compliance. Darius's calm authority had transformed a potential conflict into a lesson in accountability. Just as Darius prepared to finalize the documentation with headquarters, the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Management has instructed us to follow formal FAA and DOT procedures. This incident will be officially reviewed before departure. Sir Montgomery, please be prepared to provide a statement for the record." Darius looked up calmly, meeting the eyes of the crew and passengers alike. Would they finally take full responsibility, or would there be one last twist before true resolution? The next moments would decide the outcome of this historic confrontation. The cabin remained tense, but the shift was unmistakable. The flight attendants and gate agents, once filled with uncertainty and panic, now moved with measured compliance. Darius Montgomery sat in seat 3, calm, yet fully aware of the unfolding history around him. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and whispers circulated among passengers like wildfire. The captain's voice echoed, steady and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a verified passenger complaint and ongoing review, airline management has instructed us to document and formally acknowledge the situation before we can proceed. Sir Montgomery, we request your cooperation in providing a statement for headquarters." Darius nodded calmly. He knew this was the moment when procedure, federal oversight, and accountability converged. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about ensuring the airline formally recognized the mistake, addressed the discriminatory behavior, and implemented corrective measures. The flight attendant approached cautiously, now clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. "Sir Montgomery, we understand the seriousness. We will ensure headquarters documents the incident fully and addresses the oversight." Darius allowed a small, controlled nod. "Thank you. I want to ensure this is clear. The issue is not just my seat. It's about systemic failure to recognize rights, potential discrimination, and the need for accountability at all levels." The gate agent typed quickly into the headset, providing updates to headquarters. Within minutes, the airline's senior management began contacting the flight via the onboard systems, requesting a detailed statement from Darius. Passengers leaned forward, curiosity mixed with awe. Phones recorded every interaction. Some whispered quietly, impressed by the composure and authority Darius displayed. A mother whispered to her daughter, "This is how you stand up for yourself with dignity and knowledge. Remember this." Darius's statement was concise, factual, and firm. He described the boarding process, the crew's initial denial, the discriminatory undertone, and his use of airline executive channels and federal regulations to escalate the situation. He outlined the necessary steps to ensure accountability and prevent recurrence. As he spoke, the flight attendants and gate agents listened carefully, now understanding the magnitude of the oversight. This was no longer a personal dispute, it was a procedural and regulatory matter. Every word carried weight, every acknowledgement held legal and social significance. After submitting the statement, Darius leaned back and observed the crew. The flight attendant looked at him, her posture humbled. "Sir, we acknowledge our mistake. We failed to uphold proper procedure, and our actions were inappropriate. We will cooperate fully with management and regulatory authorities." The gate agent nodded in agreement, adding quietly, "Headquarters is documenting everything. There will be formal accountability and follow-up training." "We understand now." A wave of relief seemed to pass through the cabin. Passengers whispered quietly, some nodding in approval, others commenting on social media. Phones continued to click, capturing the moment for posterity. It was clear, Darius had transformed a personal affront into a historic lesson in accountability and systemic awareness. Then, the captain's voice returned, calm but firm. "Management has formally acknowledged the passenger's complaint. FAA and DOT protocols are being followed, and the incident will be fully documented. The flight may proceed only after verification of compliance and acknowledgement of corrective measures." Darius nodded slightly, satisfied with the progress. He had achieved more than a personal victory. He had forced the airline to confront bias, enforce accountability, and recognize the importance of procedure. The crew, now fully aware of the implications, had no choice but to comply. Passengers leaned forward, some whispering, some quietly recording. A young man whispered to his friend, "This is incredible." He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just used knowledge and authority to make them own up. Darius allowed the cabin to absorb the significance. The power of dignity, patience, and strategic escalation had shifted the entire dynamic. The crew's earlier panic was replaced with formal acknowledgement and cooperation. The airline could no longer ignore the error. It was now part of a documented record that would require follow-up and accountability. But even as acknowledgement was given and compliance ensured, the tension was far from over. Darius knew that public perception, corporate responsibility, and regulatory oversight would continue to watch the aftermath. The story was no longer confined to the cabin. It was now poised to reach a wider audience, with consequences extending beyond this single flight. Then, just as the crew seemed to regain composure, a soft ping echoed from Darius's phone. It was a notification from social media. Several passengers had already posted clips of the incident online. Within moments, the video had begun circulating on multiple platforms, drawing attention far beyond the flight. The murmurs among passengers shifted to quiet exclamations. "This is going viral, they can't ignore it now. He's making them accountable on a whole new level." Darius remained calm, yet internally he recognized that the public acknowledgement, while positive, would intensify the scrutiny on the airline. Headquarters, FAA, and DOT oversight would all converge, ensuring not only formal acknowledgement but also lasting accountability measures. The flight attendant glanced at Darius, now fully aware that the events of the last hour would not be forgotten. "Sir, we understand the wider implications. This will be documented and reviewed at the highest level." Darius allowed himself a small, controlled smile. The confrontation had moved from personal denial to procedural recognition to public exposure. Yet he knew that the final step, the true resolution, was still ahead. The captain's voice cut through again. "We are preparing to proceed with the flight. Headquarters requires one final acknowledgement from all involved staff before departure." The crew exchanged glances, clearly nervous. The weight of accountability was now undeniable. The passengers sensed the tension, cameras poised to record any final misstep. Darius met the flight attendant's eyes calmly, his voice steady and unyielding. "It's time to own it completely. Are you prepared to take full responsibility?" The attendant's hands trembled slightly. The gate agent swallowed hard. The entire cabin held its breath. Would they finally accept complete accountability, or would there be one last twist before true resolution? The next moments would decide the final outcome of this confrontation. The cabin air had shifted from tension to a charged sense of finality. Passengers, who had been witnesses to the escalating confrontation, now leaned back slightly, watching as history unfolded in real time. Darius Montgomery remained calm in seat 3A, his posture unwavering, eyes focused, fully aware that this was the moment where accountability would be cemented. Headquarters had initiated the final verification protocol. Every action, every exchange from the last hour had been meticulously documented. The airline's executive team, the FAA, and DOT officials were now reviewing the case directly via onboard communication channels. This was no longer a simple in-cabin dispute. It had evolved into a formal procedure with serious implications. The flight attendant approached cautiously, her earlier panic replaced with a tentative acknowledgement of responsibility. Her voice was steady, though tinged with humility. "Sir Montgomery, on behalf of the airline, we sincerely apologize. Our actions were inappropriate, and we recognize the discriminatory undertone in how your seat was questioned. We will ensure this is documented formally with headquarters, FAA, and DOT, and that corrective measures are implemented immediately." Darius nodded slightly, acknowledging the sincerity. "Thank you. Accountability is not about punishment. It's about recognition, correction, and ensuring fairness moving forward. Every passenger deserves dignity, and every crew member has a responsibility to uphold it." The gate agent stepped forward as well, his hands slightly shaking, but his words clear. "We acknowledge our mistakes, Sir Montgomery. Headquarters has confirmed that the incident will be fully reviewed, documented, and corrective actions enforced. We understand the gravity of what happened and will cooperate fully." Passengers whispered quietly, some recording, some nodding in subtle admiration. A few murmured to neighbors, "He didn't shout, didn't cause chaos, he made them own it." Others typed updates on social media, ensuring that the story would continue to resonate beyond the cabin walls. The captain spoke again, calm and professional, his tone final. "Ladies and gentlemen, management has formally acknowledged the incident. FAA and DOT protocols are being followed, and corrective measures will be enforced. The flight may now proceed with full compliance and assurance that accountability has been addressed." The cabin collectively exhaled. Relief mingled with respect. Darius's careful, composed strategy had achieved more than a personal victory. It had forced systemic acknowledgement and correction. The airline, through both in-flight staff and executives, had recognized their mistake, apologized, and committed to ensuring no recurrence. Darius allowed himself a small, controlled smile. It was not triumphal, it was measured. This was about justice, dignity, and the right application of authority. He had turned a situation fueled by prejudice into a lesson in accountability, fairness, and professional integrity. The flight attendants moved with renewed composure, fully aware of the consequences of prior behavior. They acknowledged Darius with quiet respect as they resumed their duties, understanding that every action moving forward would be scrutinized not only by management but by federal oversight. Passengers whispered again, some commenting on the importance of standing up for one's rights, others marveling at the calm but firm strategy Darius had employed. Cameras captured the crew's sincere apologies, the acknowledgement of fault, and the procedural compliance that ensured a formal resolution. Darius sat back, composed, reflecting briefly on the journey, from subtle discrimination to formal acknowledgement, from personal confrontation to public accountability. The flight, once tense and uncertain, was now moving forward under procedural integrity, federal oversight, and renewed respect for fairness. As the engines began to hum and the plane prepared to taxi, Darius's gaze met the flight attendant's one last time. The unspoken acknowledgement in her eyes, regret, recognition, and responsibility, was the final confirmation that the lesson had been understood. Passengers whispered quietly among themselves, some noting the historic nature of what they had witnessed. Darius had not only preserved his dignity but had forced a system to correct itself. It was a rare victory, achieved without aggression, without chaos, and without compromise. Before the plane moves, I want to hear from you. Comment below. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for your rights felt impossible? How would you handle it if it were you on that plane? Like this video if you believe dignity and accountability must always be defended. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Stories like this are real, powerful, and need to be seen by everyone. Every view helps shine a light on fairness, courage, and justice. Darius leaned back in his seat, eyes calm but thoughtful. The plane was moving forward now, but the story, its lessons about fairness, accountability, and the courage to stand against prejudice, would continue far beyond the cabin walls. In a world that often ignores injustice, standing firm with knowledge and dignity can create change that echoes far beyond a single moment. But how many will truly learn?